So today we're going to look at understanding the soils, and specifically we're going to focus in on the chemistry and biology of it. So some of the things that or one of the biggest ones that we look at rather, is redoxymorphic features, or the shorthand as we call it, redox features. So here's the first one. We're going to have just a couple of these. So either if you take your QR code and you can go to the upper left there, and if you want to scan that QR code in, and you should be able to join in to the quiz, or you can type in the word Slido, SLIDO.com, into your search bar, and you open up a different page, and then it should have a join number there, 3046900. And then just a sort of a question here. What do you think of, or what word or words do you associate with the term redoxymorphic feature? So here we have some things popping up. Some of you guys are doing. You see the bigger ones are more of the more popular questions. So we've got a few answers there. High groundwater, red, orange, gray, leaching, redox, saturation, rust. Modeling seems to be a popular one. Wet, iron, red, limiting feature. Yeah, those are some good ones. Good answers in there. Sort of gives us an idea. Oh, bad soil. There's the one. Bad soil with a frowny face. So you roll up your newspaper and swat that soil profile on the nose and tell them they're bad. So yeah, these are some good answers here, and I think a lot of them are fairly correct. I don't see anything that's necessarily wrong. Icky, that's a good one. I just see that one popped up in there. So yeah, so when I know the word model came up there, and that's a good one because there is a difference between a model and a redoxymorphic feature. So the important thing here is that a model, or a model zone, is a layer that's marked with spots or blotches of different color or shades of color. So it's just a color difference. A redoxymorphic feature is a concentration, depletion, a reduced matrix, or other features indicating chemical reduction and oxidation, and actually it should be an or, of iron and this is another and or, manganese compounds resulting from saturation. So redoxymorphic features are models, but not all models are redoxymorphic features. Now, typically, everybody or historically has used those words interchangeably, but they're not. A redoxymorphic feature is different than a model. A model may include redoxymorphic features, but it can include anything else. You could have an old root that's rotted out. You have an organic stain from, let's say, a alfalfa crown or root. You could have a zone where ants have brought up, you know, lower material from a subsoil horizon up into the topsoil or something, and you have a different color pattern. You could have different textures or surface coatings that will give you a mottled color. But that's not necessarily a redoxymorphic feature. There is a difference. So I know and I do myself use them interchangeably, but when we're talking redoxymorphic features, we should make sure that we use the term redoxymorphic feature and make sure that we're saying redox or redoxymorphic feature and not use the word model. And you can yell at me too if you catch me doing that, because they're not exactly the same thing. So why are we concerned with redox features? Well, there is a relationship between soil saturation, and that's one of the limiting factors that we have in our code, is that we want to make sure. Remember, the first day we talked about separation distance above a limiting factor, and that would include either free water, obvious saturation, or periodic saturation or seasonal saturation. So redoxymorphic features can form with certain conditions. So one of them would be an anaerobic conditions, not having oxygen or low oxygen, and that could be at saturation or near saturated conditions. And then organic matter, they need to have a source of organic matter because this is actually a biological and a chemical process. And so the biological component requires a source of food, a food supply, which is organic matter. The third component is temperature it has to be an adequate temperature for biological functions to take place, which is greater than 40 degrees. If it's frozen or too cold out there, the biology shuts down and you're not going to get that. It's again, it's biological and chemical. The biological component won't start, therefore, you're not going to get the chemical component. Has to be a neutral pH. If it's too high or too low, it's outside of the comfort zone. It's just like the temperature for the organisms. They're not going to be comfortable. It's not going to happen. And you also have to have the chemical process. You have to have iron and or manganese present for that process to take place. If they're not present, it won't take place. So those are the five things that are required is saturation or near saturation causing anaerobic conditions, a source of organic matter, the correct temperature, the correct pH, and having something to oxidize or reduce iron and manganese. So the way to think of it, it's not exactly like this, but this is about the best way that I can sort of draw the analogy, is that there are different microbes in the soil, and based on the environment that they're in, different groups of microbes will operate at a time. So it's not the same set of microbes that do each one of these functions. They're actually different groups, but you can still sort of think of it as a continuum. So most animals, including the microbes, if there's free oxygen available, they're going to use that. So if there's atmospheric oxygen in the pore spaces in the soil, they're going to use that oxygen. And what happens is that if the soil is saturated and it's underwater, an anaerobic condition, they can't access that oxygen, then they're going to start looking for other sources of oxygen. And so where they're going to go is they're going to start grabbing things, these denitrifiers are going to start grabbing the oxygen off of the nitrogen compound. So NO3 here on our little chart for denitrifiers is they will actually pull the oxygen off of that NO3 and they will consume that oxygen. If it gets wetter yet, another group of bugs will come in here, and these are manganese reducers. They will strip off the oxygen off of manganese and they will start using that oxygen. And then the next group is iron reducers. They'll strip, actually, it's a hydroxide, OH, but they'll strip the oxygen off of the iron and consume it. The next one would be sulfate reducers. They strip the oxygen off of sulfate. And then the next one is methanogens, and they'll strip oxygen off of CO2. So that's sort of the process on how it works is that the wetter it gets, different groups of microbes will start stealing that oxygen. So again, it's not the same ones, but you can sort of think of it as sort of a slide here. First, oxygen is gone, then the ones that deal with nitrogen oxygen compounds and manganese oxygen compounds and iron oxygen, then sulfur oxygen, then carbon oxygen compounds. So the ones that we're most concerned about are the ones that manganese somewhat, but also iron is that they use that oxygen off and they will change the chemical composition of iron to a free ion. And what has happens to be water soluble. And that's why it's important for us is not only is it wet, but the iron is soluble and it can go into solution into the water. So the fancy redox chemistry here is actually it's either way. So this is a reduction that goes from left to the right, and we don't have to worry about knowing what this all means, other than you see iron is combined with oxygen in a compound on the left, and on the right you see iron as a free element with water. So this is the iron in solution. This is the iron oxide. So the thing to think about this is iron in solution can transport, can migrate, can move. Iron oxide is the same thing as you think on the fender of your car. It's rust is a way to look at it. So why do we focus in on iron when we're dealing with a redox chemistry? Is that iron is everywhere in the soil. Large component of the Earth's crust and the soil colors that we see out there are various iron compounds. We looked at those before when we're talking about soil color. There are various different iron compounds are what gives it the soil its brown color. And that's why we use this this as an indicator for wetness is because iron is everywhere. So one of the things we need to have iron or manganese present. Well, there's a lot of iron in the soil, so we've met that criteria. And then having it get wet, it can go into solution. It can migrate and show color patterns to show us that it's wet. So we got a little hands-on exercise here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, typically if we're in person, we'd have everybody do this, but we can't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, I'm going to just skip out here real quick. Okay, so we're going to skip over here to the camera, and I'll sort of show you black, white here. So I've got some Skittles. You can use M&Ms or Skittles. If you have some in the house and you have them handy, I mean, feel free to participate yourself if you like to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a paper towel, and I know you can't see it because it's off the screen here a little bit, but so what I did is I have a nice paper towel like this, and I got it wet. So I'm going to take our wet paper towel here, and I'm going to put our Skittles on this, and I'm just going to wrap them up. So, oh, I got one left over. He didn't want to come out of the cup. All right, so we're going to take our wrapped up Skittles, we're going to set them in our cup, and we're going to leave them there for a bit. So what I want you to think of is the Skittles, the different colored Skittles are sort of like our iron particles in our soil. And now we've got a saturated condition. We've got some wetness out there. And now we're going to sort of let those act a little bit here. And we'll come back to them in a little bit. And we shall see what they look like shortly. But we're going to go back to this one. So again, you can use M&Ms or Skittles if you happen to have some at house. Wet paper towel, put them in a cup, and then we'll wait till the end of the segment and we'll come back and take a look at those. But sort of think on your own here what you think that they might be doing or how they might react to that, and then we'll see if your thoughts come true later on here, or if you're accurate in your assessment. So types of redoxymorphic features that we can have, and I mentioned some of these in the beginning, is that we can have a concentration. So that would be a body of apparent accumulation of iron and manganese oxides, or iron or manganese oxides. And so it would be just a mass, just sort of like a blotch. This is where we get our term model from. So it could be a blotch of iron or a blotch of manganese. We can have a nodule or concretion. So they're a little bit different. They're like a firmer nugget of something out there. Or we could have a pore lining, a lining along a pore. We could also have a depletion, because remember I said that iron, if we change the state of it, it can be a free ion and it can float in the water, be soluble in the water, and it can move. We could have an area that it left, and we could have a depletion or a loss of that iron. And then if we have, maybe it's not a loss, it didn't go anywhere, but it's still in a reduced state. Iron in that different ionic composition in a reduced state is what we call a gley. So it's grayish in color. So the way to think about this is that if you have iron that's an iron oxide, it's a rusty color. But if you have a fresh piece of steel, it's gray in color. That's sort of the way that you can think of it, is that it's not quite the same, but you can think of it as that the reduced color is sort of like grayish, like steel, and the oxidized color is the rust color. So you could have a reduced matrix that's what we call gley, and we'll look at that a little bit more. So these are some that are some concentrations or some of our masses. So we could have an iron accumulation. This one on the left, you'll see we have the topsoil. Then you can see we've got these blotchy pieces in here, these sort of red blotchiness or spots. And you can have different colors. It would be reddish or orangish or even yellowish, but you'll see this blotchiness in here where it's not a nice uniform color. It's that blotchy or that mottled appearance. So again, all redox are models, but not all models are necessarily redox. The one in the middle is a composition of both iron and manganese. Now, what do you notice is the big thing, and then especially the one on the right was just manganese. What do you notice that's starting to show up here about manganese. And again, if you guys have questions, either jump in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and then chime in here. But what do you, anybody want to guess, say anything about manganese? What do you see the difference between iron and manganese? It's black, it's dark. So what we're seeing here is iron manganese compositions are real dark reddish or brick red or almost dark brown. And manganese accumulations by itself, it's hard to see, but here's a piece of clay, and you can see on the ped faces, you see all this dark blotchiness in here. So if you want to know for sure if something is manganese, typically manganese will also have a slight purplish cast to it. So if you can find manganese, sometimes I'll even find little manganese nodules. And if you're wondering, is that like sometimes you'll see like little biologics in there, little a seed coating or an egg sac or something in a soil, or it's a little black piece, or is it a mineral? If you take it and you sort of break it open and smear it on your finger, you'll sometimes see it, it'll be like a little bit purplish, like real almost black, purple black. That's a real good cue that manganese is present. And also like this, if you see the iron, but it's sort of the real dark iron, that's usually an iron manganese accumulation. Now, with this being said, I'll mention it right away here is that typically we only use iron accumulations as a redox feature, but manganese is also a redox feature. If I just see a little bit of manganese here and there by itself, I don't get too concerned. But like this on this ped face here of iron or on this clay particle, because there's so much iron here, it's so red, especially in the red clays and things like that. They're going to have a hard time exhibiting any kind of iron redox feature because there's just so much iron there. It's going to be hard to see. But if you start seeing ped faces here that are highly covered in manganese, we should be calling those as a redox feature also. Because they really are. They truly are a redox feature. And that may be the only thing that we see on some of those heavy clay ped surfaces. So what are some other concentrations besides a mass like that? We could have a nodule or concretion. The difference between a nodule and concretion is basically sort of how they form. A nodule, the way to think of that is a small mass that's solidified, basically. It's cemented. A concretion is basically a nodule that over time has added layers to it. So if you break a nodule open, it'll appear fairly uniform all the way through. A concretion will sometimes be almost like tree rings, like concentric circles, because it's added layers over time. For our purposes, the difference between a nodule and concretion really doesn't matter. It's just that these will be like little hard pieces. You can pull them out. It'll be like little pieces of iron shot or something in the soil, but they'll be firm to extremely firm, or even ones that you can't break except with like a hammer. They'll usually be irregular shaped. They won't be like round like pellets or BBs or shot, but they'll be sort of these. You can see them in the left one. Again, the nodules, they're a little softer, harder to dig out. The right ones are more concretions. They're typically harder, or nodules or concretions, and they're just, lumpier. They're, again, it's not much of a difference other than just how they look on the inside. So the next concentration that we can have would be one called a pore lining. So a zone of accumulation that may either be coatings on a pore surface or impregnation of the matrix adjacent to the pore. So you see the one here on the left, you can see that little line here right in front of the pencil. That's basically a zone of accumulation on the surface of the pore. So it exactly matches up with the pore. The ones on the right are sort of a combination of both, but the one in the middle, you notice this sort of gray spot down the middle, that is the pore itself. And then you see this blotchy sort of iron mass around the outside of that pore. So here we have ones that are impregnation of the matrix adjacent to the pore. We've sort of got both. But then when I really call your attention to the one on the right, we sort of have both there. We have some pore linings, we have some masses around it. But the other thing that you notice, even with all three of these pictures, actually the one on the left, the one in the middle, the one on the right, besides the masses, We also notice what's the background color, the matrix color. We've grayish here. We got a lot of gray in here. This is topsoil. Instead of being black, it's more grayish black. And that's important for us because that's sort of a glade matrix. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a bit, but that's where we're actually reducing the color, reducing the iron into that different state of iron 2 instead of iron 3, the oxidized one. That's mostly like what's going on here, or here, that's either glade or it's actually been stripped out of the soil and we're seeing the natural soil mineral color behind it. So here's a couple samples, redox concentrations around soil pores. So we have a question is it's harder to see in the black one here, but you can see like here's a little root pore here with some red on it. Here's some up here. There's a few little ones, but especially on this one, this is actually a lump of soil that's platy to massive. And we're actually, I don't remember if we're looking top down or bottom up through it, but you see these black dots here? These black dots, and some of these you can't quite see. It's a little dot there, and one here. But these black dots are actually root pores. Those are where roots were. And so we're looking at it top down, bottom up. And then you can see that we've got this oxidation, pattern in association with the root pore. So the question is, remember this picture, and then here's the question. So go back into you shouldn't have to redo this again. The next question should pop up on your screen if you still have your phone logged in or still have your website logged in. But the question is, why are redox concentrations associated with the root pores? So we have a couple choices there. There's a source of organic matter. Large pores are first to drain, therefore introducing oxygen. Roots provide warmth. Environment has a neutral pH, or all the above. So I'll give you a little bit of time before I flip to the next one so you can't see what everybody else is answering. So I should have had time for a few answers to come in. So look at that. All the above is the front runner here. So let's talk about this. So why are the redox concentrations associated with root pores? So it actually is all the above, because in order for a root to grow there, we're probably going to have a neutral pH. Now, it may be on the acidic side or possibly on the alkaline side, but it's going to be fairly neutral, because if it was only a pH of 2, the root's not going to want to grow. Also, the roots themselves are going to provide some warmth there of biological action. And you guys don't have to keep changing your answers. I see you're sliding over to all the above there. You can stick with your answer. You can own it, but the roots do provide some warmth there, and so that'll help keep or you'll have more of the year will be that 40 degrees or above. Also, the large pores are first to drain. Therefore, what's going to happen? You're going to introduce oxygen in, and that source of oxygen will take that reduced iron and reoxidize it. And then also there's a root there. That's why it's associated with root pores, because it's a source of organic matter. We have that food source there. So the correct answer is all the above. Is that remember the 5 things that we need to have for redoxymorphic features. We need to have the right temperature, right pH, a source of organic matter. Got to have iron present. You know, it's all there for us. Anaerobic condition when it's wet, but then we have oxygen introduced to reoxidize. So those are all the factors that contribute to that. And that's why they form around those root pores. So that's what's going on. So I know we've had the term in the past, they say it's just a root model. Well, these are not root models. These are redox. Remember, not all models are redox, but all redox are models. So a root model is just a color blotch from a root. That could be organic staining something else. So that's why it's important to differentiate. Is it what is a root model when you say that? Is it just a color pattern from a root? That doesn't matter. If it's a redox, even if it's associated with a root, it's still a redox feature. These are very wet soils here, and they just happen to be near the root. Why? Because all the above. has a source of organic matter. It's the first to drain where we're going to get oxygen reintroduced in that large pore, has a right pH, and has the right temperature. So, redox depletion. So, we talked about masses that we can have. So, a redox depletion would be what they say is a body or an area of low chroma, so two or less, having values of four or more, where iron manganese oxides have been stripped out either individually or where both of them and then possibly clay have been stripped out. And it's usually found in conjunction with iron concentrations, but not always. So this is what they call the bullseye redox. So you can see this area in here is gray. This was either reduced or still is, and oxygen's working its way in, or the iron that was here migrated out and then got reoxidized here. So instead of having a nice uniform brown color, now we have this blotchy or mottled appearance due to a redox of gray surrounded by the red. Here's another one. This one's sort of a big oblong one, but you can see the big gray spot in the middle, and you can see well, this is more orangish yellow around the outside. Again, another big bullseye redox. And why is that? Because we have either a depletion, it's either been stripped out in the middle, or it's still reduced color, and then we have a concentration around the outside. These are ones that it's been stripped here and reprecipitated around the outside. We can also have a reduced matrix. Remember, that's our last one we have. So this is where the iron hasn't necessarily been stripped out and migrated, but all the iron is in the iron 2 state. And again, you don't have to worry about your chemistry part, but it's an ionic state. So it's not the oxidized form of iron, it's the soluble form of iron, but it hasn't gone anywhere. The iron is still there. It hasn't gone anyplace, but it's soluble and it's all of the iron 2 variety, which is gray in color. So these you can see as we dig down up here, you can see this is sort of the oxidized yellow brown. And then down on the bottom here, you can see it's gray. Here you can see everything is gray. And why do we think it's gray and reduced? Because of wetness? Well, here you can see the water in the bottom of the pit. Here's another one. We sort of got, the dark topsoil, we got the gray and yellow blotchiness, and then it just turns pretty much gray. So a reduced matrix is iron is still there, but it's all a reduced color. And a lot of times, if you take one of these samples out, like any one of these bottom ones that are gray, you can take that and leave it as exposed to air. And that iron will actually, as the soil dries up and gets exposed to air, it'll reoxidize and become, with atmospheric oxygen will combine with that iron, and it will become the oxidized version of iron again. So I've had a sample that I thought was pretty interesting. It was really, glade like this, really gray, had some nice blood red streaks of some of the pore linings in it for masses. And I thought, well, this is pretty cool. I thought it was really neat. And back when I had the office in Plover, I had a big, I don't know, probably 9 inch across lump of this. I put it in the back of my pickup truck. Well, it was a Friday, forgot about it. Monday, I'm sitting in the office and I go, oh, yeah, I had that cool soil sample that I got out in the work truck. So I walk out into the parking lot, open up the back of the work truck, go to grab my cool, gray Glade sample. And I open up the work truck, and what do I have? A big lump of brown soil. And I'm like, well, what happened to my cool gray material? It's gone. Well, the outside of that lump reoxidized and it turned brown again because it was exposed to air, started to dry out, was exposed to air. So a reduced matrix, the iron isn't gone, it can just reoxidize. Now, the interesting thing is you took that big lump, I cracked it open, and on the inside, it was still gray. It hadn't dried out in there, it hadn't had a chance for oxygen to penetrate and to reoxidize it. But that's a reduced matrix. It means it's underwater a lot. It'll get this gray color to it. Another thing to think of is just like if you're down at the beach, and I'm sure if you either dug around yourself or kids or grandkids or something, and you dig at the beach and you've got brown sand, and you dig down a little bit, and then what happens? All of a sudden, the sand will turn gray. And why is that? Because you're below the water table, or you've intercepted the water table, and that's where we have anaerobic conditions, and it's glade. You've reached a glade zone. The other interesting thing is that you go in there and you hit that gray or glade zone, or even a site like this, like in the middle one. Sometimes you'll get like a real rotten egg smell or a sulfur smell. Now, if you remember back when I was talking to microbial lunch about the different bacteria, first we have those that take the nitrogen, then those that take the manganese, then those that take the iron, and then what was after that? Those that take sulfur components. And so if they're taking a sulfate and they're stripping the oxygen off of sulfate, the free sulfur ion combines with hydrogen in the soil and you get hydrogen sulfide. And that's the swamp gas smell. And that's what you're smelling when you dig down in a bog or a swamp and you get that swampy swamp gas smell, or you dig down into the soil and it's like, yeah, it sort of stinks, rotten egg smell. Or the next one after sulfur was what? Methogens, and you're getting a methane smell, or you're getting the hydrogen sulfide smell, and that's what's going on. Is it's underwater for so long that different kind of microbes now are kicking in. They've already converted the iron to iron 2. You can see it's all gray. There's no more iron oxide for them to eat. Now you're going to start getting that hydrogen sulfide and methane smells coming out of there. So just something, just to sort of put into your bag of things here, is that when you're gray like this, something to be aware of. So if we have, and we'll talk about what a histic epipedon is in classification tomorrow, but a histic epipedon, we got the real dark organic soil on the top. We have, I don't know why it's advancing. We have a glade subsoil underneath. There's that gray subsoil underneath the topsoil, and that's what they consider a hydric condition, or possibly a wetland. Very, very wet, severe wetness that we have out there. So if you're black, or a lot of our depositional organic matter, and the only reason that top layer is black and not gray is because of all the organic matter there. Really, the iron is gone out of that topsoil too. It's just that you can't, or it's reduced in color, but you can't see it because there's so much organic matter. But even sometimes, like I showed some of those first pictures, that topsoil, instead of looking real black, may look sort of grayish black because it's reduced also. It's actually glade. It's a glade topsoil. So this would be our lay A plus less than 0 conditions. I know in the code we have that for, like, for suitability. This is A plus, you know, less than A plus 4, or sometimes we'll call it A plus 0. We got the A horizon, we're immediately right into glade or um, oxidized or reduced conditions. So some conditions are as simple as black and white, just like the one we saw, same on the left. You got black and black over gray. One of our wastewater specialists years ago coined this term. If you see black over gray, just walk away. That's what you should do. Don't look any farther. And this is actually black over, well, there's some gray and there's some red, there's some orange, there's some yellow. So you're getting all the colors in that one to get the whole rainbow. But on the right there, if you have the A horizon plus 4 more inches, before here, you can start seeing here's a redox down here in the bottom. You see a few others scattered in here. If you have the A horizon plus 4 more inches, then it's okay. And the reason that's in the code is that, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow with different horizons and different soil forming processes, there are some other things that can occur right below the A horizon that may look similar, and we don't want the average soil tester making a snap judgment in the zone. We want to make sure we have 4 inches of no redox plus the A horizon to make sure it's okay. We don't want to just make a snap judgment in the zone here. We also don't want somebody to say, okay, it's redoxed here, but everything up here is good, because if I'm trying to see redox features in the topsoil, it's going to be hard to do, because sometimes the organic matter is going to cover things up. I could be reduced and I can't see it because there's so much organic matter. I may not see oxidation in the root pores or anything else, because if it's still so wet, it's not even oxidizing yet, or it's wet but oxidizing the wrong time of year and it's too cold for the biological actions to take place, it's not going to happen either. So anyway, that's why the A+4 is in the code, is we don't want people making stack judgments in that or near that topsoil. So bullseye redox, why do classic redox have the bullseye pattern? So as free water evaporates, just like this on a coffee stain, you get the halo. But why is it more concentrated around the edge? Because through osmosis, the what the particles of coffee work their way to the edge, it dries out, and they're going to accumulate along that drying front. So you can sort of think that's why bullseye redox do the same thing, is you have oxidation taking place on that edge, and as the iron migrates out towards the edge because it's in solution and then sees the free oxygen and reoxidizes, it's going to have that oxidation front around that lump of wet soil. So on our color chart, we talked about these last week. Hue value chromas and what the colors come from, and the mineral colors. The thing I want to impart upon you now is that different iron compounds mean different things. Now we don't have it in the code that a certain color means a certain thing, but in general, and again, this is very general, the darker the colors, like the ones in the middle, like magnetite, ferrite, hematite, tend to be darker colors. And this again is just for your own knowledge of being out on the site trying to decide how wet is wet. If you're gray, you're glade, that's really, really bad. Black over gray, walk away. That's bad, bad. The darker colors tend to be more oxidized versions of iron. The ones that are especially the yellow ones here, like this one, this is an iron, it's a hydroxy sulfate. So it's iron, but mixed with hydroxy, or part of the, hydrogen oxygen molecules, which is part of water. They're more, how do I want to say, indicators of wetness. So if you see soils that have more of the yellow blotches, the orange, yellow's probably, gray is the worst, yellow is the next, then orange. The darker red ones are probably the least saturated at times. And now, again, for our purposes, they're still all redox features and where it's a limiting factor for us. But if you're looking sort of like, is this really bad, bad, or is this doesn't meet the code, it's a restriction, but it's less frequent, less severe, saturation. Those that are darker tend to be less severe, less frequent. So just for your, if you're looking for trying to get better and better places to go, to just sort of information there. But again, we talked about low chroma colors, a value of 4 or more. So values of 4 or more, so that's the top rows, and a chroma of 2 or less, so that's the left rows. If you see colors in these zones, notice, what are they? They're pretty gray. They don't have a lot of chroma, not a lot of color to them, and they're sort of on the lighter end. They're not black, they're gray. That indicates usually a redox depletion and reducing conditions. Not always. Sometimes, and again, this is why it's important when we talked about last week of knowing what the parent material. If the parent material is gray quartz, what do you think the color is naturally going to be? It's not necessarily that it's reduced, it's that it's gray quartz and it's naturally going to be that color. So it's important to know parent materials and why things form. But if you see stuff in here, you should really set up a red flag to make sure we're looking at the right thing. And then suspicious conditions here, if you have a chroma of 3 or less, these would be ones to sort of, again, not necessarily a red flag, but maybe a yellow flag to say, hey, we should look closer to make sure I'm identifying, is this really, a reducing condition? Do I have some glaying going on? Is something happening on this site? Or is it something else based on a parent material or something else that's occurring? And if you have to use this page in my soil book looks different than this one, but a lot of the same colors. If you have a Glay page in your Munsell color book and you have to use any of them on here, these are wet. These are all Glade colors. If you see this, pretty bad stuff. Now, not always the case. I know there is some blue shale, blue slate over here in Wisconsin that has some bluish colors to it naturally. But then again, that's knowing your parent material. So if you see that, it's not necessarily that it's Glade, it's that it comes from material that's blue in nature. But typically, when you see this, the clays, they go blue, gray, or green. typically it's because they're wet. You've got a problem with wetness. So our hands-on exercise. So I don't know. Anybody pipe up? Did anybody have M&Ms or Skittles at home? Nobody wants to volunteer. I know these are sort of a hot commodity when I'm doing training live. Everybody wants to eat my Skittles. So they've been sitting here a little bit. And if you notice, you can probably see right on that edge there, it looks a little different. The paper towel looks a little different as it's been sitting. So I'm going to take these out, and here, you can see it already. What's going on here? Well, this isn't quite a redox feature, but what do you think? Doesn't it look somewhat similar to redox concentrations that we had happen? And if you look really, really close, where's my pen here? Let's point this one out right here. What do you see? See how it's gray? We have a depletion. So you can sort of think of the food dyes in here as, and actually Skittles work much better than M&Ms. M&Ms tend to just show the chocolate inside or melt a little bit, disintegrate. But you can see this as we have a depletion here, and what do you have? Now I have a concentration here. So now if I let this paper towel dry out like a soil, it's wet now, it dries out, it went into solution, and now it dries. These colors are going to stay sort of now fixed in the soil. And this is what we see in the soil when we have wetness, and it gets wet at some time. It takes that iron that was a nice uniform color on that candy shell, and to put it into solution, and now it's precipitated back out someplace else. It went into solution, and now it's precipitated out. We let it dry, and it'll fix it in its spot. Now if we kept this super super wet, and especially if we kept pouring water through it, what would happen? All the colors would be washed away, and so we'd be left with white or gray candies and a white paper towel or some slight yellow tinge to it. But everything would be gone. So that's like putting the iron into solution and flushing it away, and totally just transporting it someplace else. But anyway, it's not quite iron, but it gets you the idea of stuff going into solution, and you can see how it can reprecipitate back out and make your color patterns. So um, anyway, just a fun little experiment there. Like I said, makes Skittles work so much better than I used to do M&Ms, but Skittles work so much better. Real good demonstration there. So anyway, we will be back to this here. So soil chemistry and biology here. Want to talk about clay minerals, mineral fraction. What do we have? Silicate minerals are about 92% of the Earth's crust. So we're talking a crust here, just a very thin outer surface here. So we know iron is the biggest component of the Earth's, and that's like the inner core is like almost all iron, nickel. But we're talking the crust. So 92% of the Earth's crust is silicates. And there's a couple different kinds. There's framework silicates, feldspars, and quartz. There's layered ones like micas and clay minerals. And then there's ferromagnesium silicates, olivine and amphibole. And we're going to actually look at some olivine layer today. So there's some different ones that are out there. And then we also have everything else, which is iron, aluminum oxides, hydroxides, carbonates, phosphates, sulfates, like gypsum, chlorides, like halite, which is salt, nitrates, and things like that. But the majority of it is a silicate mineral of some kind, silicon. So it's important to understand how silicon works because it's going to play an important part that a lot of our clay minerals are silicate minerals. So silicon is the gray sort of ball, the gray atom, and it wants to share with oxygen. So we're going to do a little basic chemistry here for those that remember. So if you have, all atoms have a charge to them, and they all like to be neutral. And that's why you have iron oxide, why it oxidizes so easy, is that iron wants to be, or all atoms, they want to be zero. They don't like having a charge on them. So silicon is the same way. It has a +4 charge. So it easily combines with oxygen, which has a -2 charge, and it wants to be neutral. But the other thing is that silicon has sort of 4 attachment points. So it can attach with two oxygen, and so two minus twos makes -4, and then a silicon of a +4 could technically be a 0. But the silicon likes that it has 4 attachment points. And so what it does is instead of just grabbing two oxygen atoms, it will share one oxygen atom between two of them. So each time it shares, it's really only taking half of the charge, one charge. So if it's a +4 and it shares 4 oxygens and it's only doing -1 for each of those, -1, -2, -3, -4, now it's back to being 0. So it's a +4 and it shares half of the oxygen on its 4 attachment points. It's neutral. It's +4 and it has -4 from the oxygens. So what it does is by sharing all these points, this is where it forms this lattice or a crystal. And that's how silicon lattice structures or crystalline structures form. So, how are these layered silicates? Like micas and clay minerals. These are, if you look back on a page forward, the sheet like this here, and there's many sheets stacked on top of each other. That's how you get the top ones and the bottom ones are then connected. These are actually micron, micrographs of, very, very, this is half a micron across. You can see these little players or layers. These are actually the layers of those layered silicate minerals. So like little plates, little accordions, they all sort of stack together. So this is what a lot of our clay particles look like, as opposed to a round sand grain. A lot of our clays minerals look like this under the microscope. Not only are they small, but they're small and they're little layered guys like a book kind of thing. So the next important part here that ties in with our chemistry fun is that I want to introduce you to something called cation exchange capacity. Now, there's nothing in the code talking about this, but it's sort of an important concept to understand about how soils treat wastewater and how things occur in the soil. Is that cation exchange capacity is a measure of how many cations or positively charged ions can be retained on soil particle surfaces. So there are negative charges on the surface of soil particles. And why is that? Because back here, if they're in the lattice structure and the edge of the lattice is exposed, if it's only taking here one of them to balance its out, then this oxygen has a free negative charge hanging out here. So each of these that are unattached, because remember this is -2, -2, -2, and then here's sharing one each way here, there's a extra minus charge, extra minus hanging out here. So now these edges are all minuses hanging out here. On all these broken edges of these clay particles are minuses hanging out there. And that allows nutrients that come by like potassium, ammonia, calcium, even pollutants like lead that has a positive charge, like a magnet of negative and positives attract. It's going to sort of hold it there through magnetism. So the idea behind this is a clay particle has a lot of negative charges. A lot of those little plates are broken, where sand is not going to be as much. Sands will have low CEC or cation exchange capacity. Clays will have high ones. So just something to just sort of be aware of is that depending on the soil type, like sand may only have 1 to 5. So not only do we have sand is not always the best filter for soil, one, because water moves through awful fast. Remember, we talked about retention time and not hydraulically pushing stuff through soil. Sand moves stuff really fast. It's very good at getting rid of water, but not so great on the treatment. And also, there's not much for CEC there, cation exchange capacity, where clay, you can have more than 30. But then the other thing to realize, if we have organic matter is a very high cation exchange capacity. So that's why things such as mounds and acrates work so well. Even though we put sand in a mound, it may move through fast. We don't get treatment, but when it hits that native soil and you have that organic matter down there, that's where we're going to get a lot of the polishing treatment. So I want to mention nitrogen cycle. Get into this just a little bit, even though it's not in a code that we we treat for nitrogen. We do get some treatment, and sort of important to understand, especially if you get into large scale systems where we're going to have to do nitrogen removal, that there is a cycle here. So we have free, most of the atmosphere is made up of nitrogen, and then it can go different ways. As we have nitrogen fixing bacteria, they can take free atmospheric nitrogen and they make it into things like ammonia, and then they can go to nitrates, nitrites, the nitrifying, denitrify, which means then it gets converted back into atmospheric nitrogen again. So just be aware that there's a circle out there, just like the water circle. So there's nitrifying bacteria, there's Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter. They're obligate aerobes. They require oxygen, but they're usually best at low oxygen conditions, and they convert ammonia to nitrite, nitrate. It was thought that there was only two Nitrosomonas nitrobacter that are out there. There's actually dozens and dozens of them, but these were the big guys and are easy to identify. So modern, newer textbooks are now identifying that there's many out there, but these are sort of the big culprits and are easy to spot. That's why they're sort of focused on, but they're out there, and there's dozens of denitrifying bacteria that take the nitrate or nitrite that are done by Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter or some of their other cousins, and then we'll take it and then convert it back to free nitrogen. But the way this has to work then is that they use free molecular oxygen. These guys are low oxygen. So that's why we go through an anaerobic tank, is low oxygen, and then why do we oxygenate it through like aerobic treatment unit? This then denitrifies it and brings it back out to atmospheric ammonia or atmospheric nitrogen. So that's why it's important to both do low oxygen and then high oxygen. That's how you basically remove nitrogen out of a system. And then the last section here we're coming up on is a little bit about soil biologics. And just want to mention, there another important aspect. Again, it's not like there's a code derived criteria for how many worms there are per square meter or something of a soil, but it's important to understand how they function and how they act upon a soil. So we have the two main groups of biology is flora and fauna. So flora is the plant communities, so plants and fungi, and then we have the fauna, which is the other ones, even things we call megafauna, such as big things like gophers and fun things like that. And then we have, so here's just biologics, talking about what's out there, the little bugs and critters that are in there. So a teaspoon of soil contains more living organisms than the number of people on Earth. So you think about that, sort of the scale down our size is that all the people that live on Earth, if we were little microbes, we would all fit in a teaspoon of soil. So lots of little guys out there doing their things that we don't even see. And then you think about that in a farm field or even your yard, how many teaspoons of soil there are, or out in the farm field or across the Midwest or something. That's a lot of critters. So the last one that we have for the Slido is what microorganisms live in soil. So this is another word one, I believe, if you want to put in some words, what you think is out there. What do you think lives in the soil? Microorganisms. So we're not talking gophers and worms, big stuff, chipmunks or I don't know, hermits. So there we go. We got some nematodes. We got bacteria. Bacteria seems to be the popular one. Everybody's doing bacteria again. Anthrax. Yeah, yeah. Mini mats. Oh, okay. Yeah, there could be some mini me's out there. Gotta be more than one of me. Worms. Oh, I like that. Kitty, is that you putting the little emojis on there again? Getting all fancy.
No.
No, somebody's got emojis. I like the worm emojis. That's pretty nice. Yeah, microorganisms, viruses. Yeah, so like the anthrax, we can have different viruses, bacterias, nematodes. Yep, a little virus symbol there. So yeah, you're right. I mean, there's lots of different microorganisms out there. So we can have things such as, 1 trillion bacteria. So this is in a handful of soil. Easily a trillion bacteria. That's a small handful of soil. And in some cases, I've seen up to 1 trillion. They say even in a teaspoon. 10,000 protozoa. That was one that wasn't mentioned, but protozoa, they're sort of like bigger critters, bigger than bacteria. They run around a little bit I guess they're the big guys, the big fish in a little pond. I guess. I mean, they're the big guys of the small world. Nematodes, again, they're sort of the big guys of the small world too. They're like miniature miniature worms. And then also the one that's really interesting is 15,000 miles of fungi mycorrhizae. So, those of you that mushroom hunt, maybe you're looking for morel mushrooms and you go, well, where are the morels? Well, they're everywhere. You're walking on them constantly. But what we hunt is actually the fruiting body of the mushrooms that, as they fruit and they, come up to the surface, their fruiting body is what we see and what we pick. But the mycorrhizae, it's like these little thin fibers. They're in the soil constantly. They're out there, and we just don't realize it or don't know it. So all the different things, and even stuff like algae, we sort of forget about them. But you can have algae, bacteria, actinomycetes. If you don't know what those are, that's what gives Earth its earthy smell. Fungi, nematodes, protozoa. So lots of different things out there. But again, it's just pretty amazing what's all in a teaspoon. Want to mention also the surface area, things like this. The high surface area, and those little clay particles, just all those little plates, give you more attachment sites, not only for the microbes, but also gives them more spots to consume things like the pollutants and pathogens that we send through. So if we have a virus that we want to get rid of, all those little attachment sites, more square footage gives you more opportunities for microbes to grow. If you're on a big piece of sand, it's sort of a big smooth, there's not a whole lot of opportunities for them. So the way to think of it is like a solid cubic foot of wood is 6 square feet of surface area, 1 square foot on each face. But if you cut it into 1 inch cubes, now each one is a lot more square feet of space, because each cube is now 6 square inches, and then how many cubes do you have, and you figure out your total square footage. It's a lot. So just back to the sort of food web. I mean, not like we need to know this, but I mean, a lot of different things. We've got birds. Believe it or not, I went to the chiropractor today. I did not see it. I could not find him in the tree, but some silly robin was out here singing in the tree today. I don't know what he's looking for, but he sure as heck is not eating any worms this time of year. So it's got to be picking dead berries or dried berries off a tree. But anyway, heard a robin today. Didn't see him. But we got words. Birds and animals. They're eating stuff like worms and ticks and other stuff that live in the soil, and those guys eat smaller things and smaller and smaller and smaller. So a lot of things go on. And again, the surface area of things, 1 gram of silt loam soil has the surface area of about one tennis court, and 1 gram of sand, because it doesn't have all those little plates and all those little surface areas, has about 1 square meter of surface area. A big difference. Same amount of soil, a gram each, but that those little plates there create so much more surface area, and not only for the biology to attach to, but that's why they have so much more cation exchange capacity, so many more sites for not organics to attack other organic things, microorganisms, but also for the chemical reactions to take place, that cation exchange capacity. So the key is more surface area, more microbes, we get more treatment. And just to recap, I mean, biologics, they reduce raw organic matter into humus. They consume the pathogens. We get the nitrifiers, denitrifiers. They also build soil structure. A lot of the organic compounds will help make soil structure, make PEDs hold together. We get better uptake of nutrients because of the biologics out there. They're eating the stuff that we're putting out there, the biological material in our wastewater. They're consuming it as a food source. And then again, without the biologics, we would not have redox forming, because it requires a biological with the chemical component to make redox. All right. Okay, we're back at it, and we're gonna look at some things here. So those of you that had your samples, we're gonna look at a few soil samples here. I'm gonna show you how it goes. If you have a texture chart, something like this, there's various ones online. It's just hand texturing flow chart. These are a good start. people that haven't used them before can get hung up too much on, exactly it, 2.5 centimeters, by the way, is an inch. So is it less than 1 inch? Is it 1 to 2? Is it greater than two? And how long is it? Again, it depends on how well you work the sample, the how big of a sample you have. Obviously, if you have a very small sample, it's going to be hard to get any length of ribbon, even if it is clay. If you have too big of a sample, you might be able to make a longer ribbon because it's still sticking together. So it's a feel kind of thing, and it's not, just to give you sort of an idea about short, medium, long, I guess would be better than exactly how much. And also, when you start texturing, just getting the feel of how much resistance, that's something to pay attention to as you push. Is it fairly easy to push through and make a ribbon? Then you're not going to have as much clay content as one that's really, you're giving your thumb a workout trying to push it. You can feel that there's a lot of resistance there, a lot of material that you have to work through. So anyway, if you have a flow chart like this, you can sort of follow along. The textural triangle is handy when we talk about what these were, analyzed at a lab. So we have known numbers for each of these. And again, like we talked about the first day about or last week about how to read the textural triangle. So the idea is getting some basic things is that if it's dry, we have to water it up to get it so we can mold something, and then if it doesn't even hold together when squeezed, it's loose, it's sand. If it doesn't really form a ribbon, it's just there, we can sort of mush it through, then it's loamy sand. And then if it's holding together, then depending on how long it is, and then whether it feels, smooth or gritty or sticky, then we break it out into different categories. So what we're going to do is we're going to take sample A, and I'm going to flip this over to hopefully keep my place here a little clean. So I'm going to pour some of this. So take some. You don't have to have a whole lot, but um, I think I'm going to try not to make such a mess, but we'll see how it goes. So you got your spray bottle here, and so you'll have to work this one up a bit. Throw your pieces back in. And for those that didn't get a kit, you'll just have to live vicariously through my playing with the samples here. And the nice part here is if we get too much moisture, we do have more sample. Um, so this is probably not quite as much as I would like to have. Boy, that is, oh, there it goes. Finally adjusted the color there. You can see I don't have much of a sample there. That's basically all I have. It's a little, I like to have, for my texturing, I like to have probably about just under a golf ball size is sort of what I like to have. Yeah, these things are really dry. But so this is a little bit under, I know with the camera there, it takes a little bit to adjust its light. There, it brightens up a little bit. You can sort of see I got a not too bad of a sample there. So, so the first things that we can do is we can't really get structure off these because they pulverize these samples. Other ways we could practice doing our structure, but we don't have the ability to do that. But if you take your Munsell color book, like I said, the colors aren't working the best here. It takes a little bit to go through. So you'll have to sort of do these on your own, and I'll try to show you once the color adjusts. But typically when we do color is I'll take this ball, I'll flatten out a little spot, wait for the color to come around here. Never lightens up. Too much dark. Oh, there you go. So I lightened up a spot here a bit. I just got to get closer to camera. Flatten off a spot. And then what I do is then I'll go, usually start on the 10YR page, and you'll try to find a color that matches up. And these are, like I said, going to be too dark. You're not able to see it. But you'll have to do it but you'll have to do it on your own. But basically, what you do is you put this down here behind it, and you sort of move around until you see one that matches up here close to your color chip. And so, if you're doing colors, I guess I'll let somebody chime in here what they come up with. You can either type into the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and just pipe up. What's everybody getting for a color? So the way I do it is I do in a 10YR page, see whatever the closest color chip I have is, and then um, just in case, so if I pick whatever number, let's say 4, and then I will go up a page to the redder one, and then I will go down a page to the more greenish one, or sorry, down a page to the redder, up a page to the green, and see if that's a better or worse. So it's like going to the optometrist. Is this better or is this worse? Find what color works best for you on the 10YR page. That's where most of them are going to be, and then you can either go up a page or down a page and see what it looks like. So anybody want to comment? What are they getting for a color?
So we had a few entries into the chat, Matt, ranging kind of from the uh, down in the 3-1 to 3-2 range, centering kind of
Okay.
on 3-2, but 2-2, 3-1, things like that. One person did
Yep.
include that they use the 10YR page, which is a
Yep.
common color page, as you had said. You'll find as you guys are out doing soil testing, your local area may have a page that you like. So for a lot of my
Yep.
work district, we're in the 7.5YR page. And then on the Douglas County clays, we're in 5YR. So very
Yeah.
red soils.
Yeah. The other thing to be aware of is that, I'm here under fluorescent lights. It will be a little bit different than out under natural light. The important thing isn't necessarily what color you come up with, it's the relationship of the colors to each other. So if we're off one color chip or so, it's not the end of the world. And even if you do the CST exam, we have colors in there. There is a light, and you are going to be indoors. We did the colors indoors, and also we give you a page up or down. We also give you a color chip up or down. So lots of different choices. But I came up with. I said it's not really focusing well, but I came up with the 10YR32, which is this one right here. So that's the one I came up that matched best for me in here. You may be slightly different, but again, we should all be in about the same ballpark. So now that we have this, so now that we have your sample here, and now we're going to try to let's see if it ever lightens up here. So if we have our sample, now we're going to try to work according to um, this flow chart. And so the first thing we're going to do is, does it form a ribbon? So as I push through, you can see, here, I'll turn it on the side. You can see it's forming a soil ribbon. You see how I broke off that little piece? That piece that broke off there. Well, let's see if I get the camera to focus. Maybe if it ever does light. But so anyway, I did break off a little piece there, and it seems to be about an inch long, give or take. It's not like very, very long, but you can see by pushing through, it's you want to have some, and you just sort of push it up until it wants to break naturally under its own weight. And it's about an inch, maybe a little bit more, but this is where you don't want to get too hung up on how long, that sample is to where it breaks. You don't want to worry too much about that. Again, the camera is not really working here. We got a lot of extra light coming in.
It might
Um,
help to take the paper towel away. I don't know
yeah,
if
because
that's
that's what I'm wondering,
messing
if
with the
that's
white
not
balance.
too white and it's messing with it. But oh, that did. There you go. Well, good
Look at
job,
that.
Katie.
Nice. That
Oh,
wasn't me. The chat's smarter than I am.
oh, chat's smarter. If chat's smarter than all of us, that's the way it works.
Yeah.
I was just trying to keep my black, not brown, but no, that works. Yeah, it's the white balance is screwing it up there. So, but anyway, we've got that sample here, and you pushing it through here. But just how much before it wants to naturally break, you can see there it's starting to break. And how long is it? Well, an inch, give or take. Again, don't get hung up on exactly how long it is. So we're going to call it about an inch or so, less than an inch. Um, so it doesn't make much. So our flow chart would be here. Does it form a ribbon? Yeah. How much? It's less than an inch or about an inch or so. I wouldn't say it's moderate, it's sort of a weak. And then does it feel sandy? So now as you're playing with your sample, what does it feel like? Does anybody feel grittiness or sandiness to it? I don't feel any. Does it have, is it moderately sandy? No, I really don't feel anything. It feels sort of very silky smooth kind of thing to it. And so does the sample have little or no sand? And so we hopefully are coming up with an answer of silt loam. So this is what silt loam feels like. Sort of a silky, smooth, very moldable, but it's not very sticky at all. It's just sort of a generic in-betweener kind of thing. It's there, but you don't feel any kind of stickiness or any kind of grittiness or anything to it. So if it was a loam, you would feel more a little bit of grit, or you'd have something to it. But anyway, that's what we come up with for this one. So everybody sort of follow along. They understand. They're getting that one. All right. So that was the lead you through the process on that one. And now I'm going to try to. So the nice thing here is that if you have your samples, you can keep them, and then you'll know what your samples are. And so for those of you that are following along at home, which hopefully everybody is, the analysis on this would be 2% sand, 74% silt, and 24% clay. So if we go in here to our textural triangle, I zoom in on that a little bit. So if we're at 2% sand, our percentage sand here is nothing. So we're going to be real close to this baseline here because that's 0, 10, 20. You can see there's the 10 line going up here. So we're basically nothing. And then 74% silt. So 74% silt. Here's the 70 line. And so we're just over. So actually, this is a pretty close one, and 24% clay. So we were like right about in this corner, sort of where we're at. So it's a silt loam. The other thing too, for those of you that may have been thrown off and said it feels a little bit sticky, something else that you have to take into account when you do these is that every percent organic matter that you have is going to feel like 4% clay. So if you have a sample like this that's very dark, that has a lot of organic matter in it, it's going to feel stickier, clayier because that organic matter. Remember how we just went through and talked about organic matter and the biologics are like a binding agent kind of thing, and they can help make soil structure. Well, they help make soil structure. They're also going to help bind that soil together, and you're going to feel it. And so anything that you have in there that's a higher organic, this is probably dark, is probably 4% organic matter, give or take. Three, well, maybe close to 4% organic matter. So anything that you have there, again, it's going to feel clayier, stickier. So you have to remember dark samples, you have to back off a little bit. I had a friend of mine, a soil tester, and he said, we had a sample that we're trying to figure out for lab analysis, and he said, "Oh, that's loamy sand." And I said, "No, I bet it's sand." And he said, "No, I bet it's loamy sand. I can feel a little bit of fine material in it." And I said, "It's topsoil, and what you're feeling is actually organic matter. I bet it comes out as straight sand." And he bet me dinner on it, and I told him, I says, "I know you're wrong." And came back from the lab analysis, and it came back as 98% sand. 1% silt, 1% clay, because that's what was going on is that, it had probably 2.5% organic matter. And that was enough that made it feel like it might have had 10% of something else in it, but it did not. It was basically almost straight sand. So just something to be aware of when you're going through your texturing on that one, just to pay attention to that. So the next one we want to do here is we're going to take the B sample and we're going to muck up this one and go through. So same thing we had before is when you get your sample, pour some out, and you can see this almost feels, well, gritty, but it's not really because these are little peds that have not been broke up yet. So So I got my spray bottle. And what do you notice too when you start mixing this up right away? What are you feeling? I can tell you what I feel right away. Anybody in the chat? You getting any comments there, Katie?
Sorry, my hands are covered in goo.
Oh, I
Um,
know. I can't type either. That's why I'm asking you because my hands are covered in goop here.
yeah.
Um,
So the chat is saying they're feeling grit, they're feeling
what's that?
sand.
Yep.
Their
I'm trying to
keyboards
get it
are
wet.
full of
So
silt, so it's hard to type. And
yeah.
if
So
you zoom out a little bit on your
yeah.
screen, zoomed in
Oh
a little.
yeah, I could do it. Why? You want to see the close-up version? That's really the extreme close-ups here. But yeah, trying to do that. Here, we'll move this. That worked better. So everybody can see that. Um, it well looks like cat litter to me, but well, we know what cat litter is made out of. It's made out of what? Clay material? I don't know. Maybe that's what they sent us as little kitty litter here. But what do you notice about it? Is it's pretty sticky. It's sticking to your hands really well. But we're trying to mash this stuff up here, and what do you see? It is so we get something worked out again, and you can try and do your color on this one. So same thing. I don't know if it'll show up for you or not, but I'll do my color 10YR. Let's see what I get here. I'm coming up with 10YR 43. So anybody else wants to come up with theirs, they can say what you think on it. But I start doing this, and again, what is happening um, is it is very sticky, and I push it through, and what's happening? I can form a pretty good ribbon. Oh, there it's starting to break, having a piece like that. So it's forming a good ribbon, but it does eventually break. It's not like one that I can keep going forever. So that one is sort of, what would I say? It's over an inch, but it's probably not 2 inches. So I'd say it's a moderate ribbon, but I'm feeling a lot of stickiness to it. So if we go back onto our chart, does it form a ribbon? 2.5 to 5? Yeah, about there. And then here it says excessively wet, a small pinch. And you can feel for the fine grittiness in it. And so if you want to do that, you can just oversaturate it. Or a lot of times, what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of extra water, like in the palm of my hand, like that, and I'll take a little sample and I'll just sort of rub in here to sort of see what I feel. And if you're rubbing in there and you feel it, you should feel, what are you coming up with? Feel a little bit of grit, not much, but I feel a little bit. Everybody following along with that? Or are you getting something totally different?
Mhm.
Are you lost?
I think they are not typing because they're same like
Because
me.
their hands are all full of grit. Okay, well we'll assume that you're still there and we didn't lose you and you're not throwing mud balls at the wall or chasing your cat around or whatever with it. But yeah, so it's got a moderate ribbon, but you can feel there's pretty good clay content because this one you notice over the last one. Last one was like silky smooth. This one takes some effort to push through. That's also going to give you a clue at how long the ribbon's going to be. And it's not like really sandy. If it felt really sandy, that would be sandy clay loam. If it's really smooth, then would be silty clay loam. So it feels more like the other one, but it has the longer ribbon like this. And why did that other one have such a long ribbon? One, because it's organic matter, and two, we were way up in a corner of silt loam near silty clay loam. And that one says you have smooth, but you have a longer ribbon. That's why that one was so close. This one, I feel a little bit of grittiness to it. So this one is what they call clay loam. And if
Yeah,
we
and
go
so we
back,
had a comment in the
yep.
chat that put it as the main class being clay.
Hmm.
I guess I can say so based on what I need to do when I hand texture is usually if I think it's borderline like we're going above 2 inches, let's say we're at like 2.2 inches or something like that
Yep.
is what I'm measuring my ribbon at. I know that my ribbons are always longer than these charts, so I knock it down one.
Right. The other thing too is if you have straight clay, that also you're going to really be working your thumb out pushing that stuff through.
Yeah.
Clay loams, you're going to have some effort, but if you're up in that clay, sandy clay or silty clay, it's a lot of work to push that sample through.
And you'll be
So
able to make sometimes basically an infinite ribbon. Only
yeah,
it's
you'll be able to make
weight.
a roll it a, 8-inch long kind of wire kind of thing. That stuff will hold together. Well, it's like pottery. It'll hold together a long time. So on this one, the numbers are 29% sand. So we're basically about 30. So we're on this line here. And then we're intersecting with 30% clay. So, or 29% clay. So 30 here, clay comes 30 here. We are really close to right there in clay loam for this sample.
Yep, and field samples when you're doing this in the field, they obviously won't be this dry. So when we initially poured it out in our hands, at least I thought this that it was sandier than it was. But when you're in the field, the soils will not be kiln dried, so
Yeah, and that's the thing
it
too
won't
is that
appear as sandy
yeah,
as
when
it.
we're trying to do this, we're also getting a lot of the little lumps of soil, and again, that's why it's important to work them up and make sure that we've got them nice and nice and wet because otherwise, if we have any of those little peds or little blocks of soil in there, we're going to feel it and you're going to go, oh, that's a lump of something, and it's going to throw you off because really, it's just a piece that I haven't worked up enough to get the texture done on it. So my coverage is a little messy here. So now we're going to go with C. And this one's going to be a little bit tricky. Warning you up front, tricky. So pour some of this sample out. Remember, got some organic matter here. And just working it up off camera so I don't make such a mess on my dark mat. So, so when you're working this one, what do we notice here? Should be able to tell something right away. And if nothing else, if you take this up next to your ear while you're molding the ball, you should hear something. Because I can swear I can almost hear it with my headphones on. Yeah, I very easy when I take my headphones off, I can hear it. You can hear it's gritty. You can hear the sand in it. You can hear it sort of crunch back and forth. And maybe that was just me being suggestive, but especially I took my headphones off, I can hear it. You can hear the sand in this one. Feel it. You can hear it. Now, remember though, because this is so dark, anything that you feel, you got to remember to back off a little bit and even the size of your ribbon, because again, that organic matter is going to act like a binder. So we do a quick color here, and I am going to it's close. I would probably say 10 by R32 again, but it is close to 3-1. I don't know if I can. Yeah, the colors aren't showing in here very well, but I'm close to 3-2. This one right here, possibly 3-1, but I'm guessing it's a 3-2 for a color. So again, we have this one, and we're going to have to look at our chart and see, how big is the ribbon and does it form a ribbon? So as I push through here, am I getting ribbons? Yeah, I got one there. You can see one formed. Little guy. Oop, picking up, he's falling apart. But I got a little one, not much, but it forms a ribbon, but it's very small. So this one should be pretty obvious that it is under an inch. Is a ribbon less than 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch? Yep. An excessively wet, a small pinch. And I don't even know if I really need to do that. Is it moderately sandy or little sand, or is it very sandy? It should be obvious. It's very sandy. So this is sandy loam. So now maybe some of you are following along saying, gee, Matt, I thought you said this would be a tricky one. Why did you say this is tricky? Anybody want to comment for extra bonus points that don't matter? Anybody want to know why I'm saying this is a tricky one?
Why, Matt?
Okay, why, Katie? Because the answer is if we have sand, loamy sand, or sandy loam, our first thing to do is determine the 12 textures. The next one is to determine what kind of sand do we have. So this one, although you can't really do it by texturing, you can do it by visual observation. See, what do I have in here? Does it look like I have any coarse or very coarse sand in here? No, I can see that. Now this is where one where you may want to take a spot, hypersaturate, and then take your finger and roll in here and say, yeah, I feel sand, but what do I feel? There's a couple bigger pieces in there, but it's fairly small stuff. I don't feel anything really big in there. It's a lot of fine sand. If you had very fine sand, this it would feel gritty, but it would feel um, you can feel it here. And this is something you just got to practice with. This is um, fine sand is what it comes out to be. So the lab analysis on this one is we'll zoom back into our textural triangle here. Got a little glare. We have 74% sand. So we're way over here between 70 and 80, 74% sand, and we are at 6%, well, 20% silt. So 20% silt, we're coming down, we are at about, right about here. We are about there. So we're on the sandy, sorry, yeah, fine sandy loam, and we're right here on actually on the edge of loamy sand. But the reason why it forms such a good ribbon is because remember we got this organic matter in here. If we didn't have this dark organic matter in here, it may hardly form any ribbon. It's going to be really weak. But the fine sands in here also help bind stuff together. And if you get an area that has fine sands or very fine sands are hard to tell. But if you super saturate it or hold it up to your ear, you can hear it crunch kind of thing. Again, that's something you're going to have to play with if you're in that kind of area. But you can't really sieve these out. You could, but it'll take you forever sieving to try to figure out if it's fine or medium. But you can get an idea. You don't see, coarse or very coarse in here. It's not like super fine, but it is fine. So this actually, the lab analysis says that it's 41% fine sand. So if you have more than 25% in a category, if we remember back to our first day, then it's probably going to kick you into that. So because we've got 41% fine sand, this is actually classified as um, fine sandy loam. So that's why I called it tricky because we had to do our texture and then our subtexture. So that's that one. Get my hand clean. Oh, and I should have mentioned that too, is that if you're trying to save these samples or even between them, you should be cleaning off your hand fairly well between them because otherwise we're going to cross contaminate. For instance, if you're just dealing with the clay one and now you're doing the sand, you're going to go, oh, I'm feeling sticky. Well, no, you're not. You're feeling the previous sample that you're looking at. So let's do D, our next one that we have here. So we got our somewhat clean hand. Yeah, I know it's not perfect, but so we got our sample there. Trying to move that around. So what do you notice about this one right away? Similar to what we had before. It's sticky. So work up your sample. I can just tell now. But I got a little bit of a sample worked up there. I said I flatten off a little spot. And then I will put it under my color book and see what I can come up with here. So this one, I'm coming up with 10YR43. I don't know what anybody else comes up with, but that's what I got on mine. And I got a little bit of dark stuff I mixed in from one of the other samples, but oh well, we won't notice it. So the first thing is does it form a ribbon? Well, I can see it's going to form a ribbon, and I don't have a real big sample here, but still I can push, and it's we're forming a fairly long one. That one sort of broke. Let me zoom my camera out here. I'm a little bit in too much, but I can again, if you have a small sample like this, it may stick to your fingers and want to break off sooner, but I can push a, I can keep going. It's making a ribbon here, keeps going around. So it's a pretty decent one, but it is breaking. You can see, well, I just snapped that one in half, but it's a pretty long one. I cracked that one in half, but it was pretty decent. So it's over an inch, but it's not 2 inches long, but it's very moldable. You can really mold it. But what do you notice too is that it feels a little tacky. You can feel that clay content in it. So the difference is here is that, again, does it form a ribbon? Yes. Is it more than an inch? Yeah. Is it more than two? Again, more than two is like Katie said, if you're debating whether it's more than two, it means you can really ribbon that thing out. And this one, it's not like super long. I mean, it forms a good ribbon, pretty positive, but it's not a more than 2 inch one. But then the next question, does it feel very gritty? I don't feel any grittiness to it. Do you feel slightly gritty? I mean, you can super saturate and rub here. I don't feel anything. It feels really smooth. Um, this is more of like what you'd think of as like modeler's clay is probably what it feels like. And this is like a silty clay loam. And so if we look at our textural triangle, we'll go here again and zoom in. I'll try not to get the glare. And this lab analysis says 10% sand. So we're on this line right here. And we have 58% silt. So 60% is right here and intersecting with 10 right here. We're right about in here. So right pretty close in the middle of silty clay loam. But like I said, this silt loam and this is actually pretty close to our first sample. Silt loam, silty clay loam, they both feel really pliable, really moldable. I know it's like I said, this is what you think of more of like a modeler's clay or something like that, but they're sort of both right in that ballpark. All right, so we got that one. We got one more, so we can get our last sample in here. I'm gonna do a little scrub down of my dirty hand. So I got my sample here. Oh, we gotta zoom back out. That's like extreme close up. So I got my sample. Got to get her wet again. So you should be noticing how this one feels different than the other samples we have. But you can see as I'm trying to moisten it up, what do you notice? It's sticking to everything. I'm really sticky. So this should tell you, what do we have? Probably a high clay content. And yeah, I'm having problems. It's not coming off of my fingers very well. It is sticking to everything. So this one, you work this up, and what's the thing that you notice right away is, for me, even to mold this into a ball, I'm really pushing hard. It's taken, I'm giving my thumb a workout. So if
Also
you're ready,
taking a lot more water than if
it's
we think
taking a
back
lot
to
more
the
water.
sand sample.
And if I'm, yeah,
Think
if I
about
was
the
going
amount
to
of
do,
surface area and how much there is to adhere
yeah,
to for those water
yeah.
particles.
And what's that? The kids, 1, 2, 3, 4. I declare a thumb war. If you practice this sample, you'll be pretty good at that because you'll strengthen your thumb muscles. So this one here, again, what are we? If I want to push a ribbon, now you should notice this one. We talk about a ribbon. Look at me. There it goes. That's my ribbon until it finally broke. Is that more than 2 inches? Absolutely. I can keep, and if I was careful, I probably could have made this even go longer, but it sort of circles around on itself. But yeah, look at that. I mean, if you're worried about a ribbon, I can drop it. It still doesn't break. So there is a lot of clay content here in here. It is holding together. Well, I suppose that we didn't get a color off this one yet, did I?
Nope, not
Oh,
yet.
I suppose I should go do that. So let me see what I come up with. Um, well, I come up with 10YR44, but if you really wanted to convince me, I can maybe go with a 7.5YR44.
That's what I was gonna say, Matt.
If
I wasn't gonna fight you on most of your colors, but I was
oh,
gonna say that's a seven and a
I
half.
said it's
And
I
not just
could I
because
could
it's my favorite page.
not because it's your favorite, he's showing favoritism, huh? So no, I could be very convinced that it's a 7.5 YR44. And that's why we don't, even on the CST exam, we don't judge too much because everybody's eye is going to perceive stuff a little bit different, you know. Um, but going back to our spreadsheet, we did come up with, does it form a ribbon? Sure does. You betcha. Is it greater than 2 inches long? You betcha. Does it feel gritty? I don't feel anything in there. Does it feel smooth? No, it's not smooth. You can, like I said, this takes a lot of effort to push through. So I guess this would be very so smooth. You're going to be able to manipulate it pretty decent. This is a lot of effort to manipulate. So I wouldn't say, I guess very smooth isn't what I would call it. I would say stiff. It's a lot of effort to push through, but it's, is it very smooth? Well, there's not a huge amount of effort, but it does take some effort. So that's the difference between the, smooth and very smooth. I don't like those. I guess I would say how sticky or how stiff it is. This one, you can still, you know, I can still mold it. It's moldable, but it's not like soup. I mean, if you get straight clay, it's going to be really stiff, really moldable. This has a little bit of give to it. It's a little soft, but it's not like super hard. So this is one, again, you're just going to sort of have to get the gist of it. This one's going to be a silty clay. So it's not like super smooth. It's not like super stiff, but it's pretty good, but I can still mold it fairly easy. This is what they call silty clay because it's over a 2 inch ribbon. Um, and it's not like super hard, super stiff. So the lab analysis on this one, if we were zooming in, would be it is 2% sand, real big. We're basically right on the bottom here on the nothing, and 43% silt. So we're about 40 here. So we're in here, and about 55% clay, and so right in here. So we're about right there. So close to the clay, but like I said, I just don't feel it stiff enough that I would call it clay. And even though it's somewhat borderline, um, but yeah, it's getting close to clay, but it's just a little bit too pliable for me that I would not quite call it clay yet. But anyway, that's your samples. So I hope everybody had a little fun with that, a little bit different. We typically, if we do these live in person, we'll have 12. Well, actually, we have 10 samples set up of most of the known textural classes so that everybody can sort of practice and feel what silt, loam, and the different ones are. But again, that's a little bit misleading because even so, with the percentage of organic matters in each of them, that does throw your hands off a little bit to what you feel. Um, you know, but
Matt,
anyway,
we had a
yeah,
question in the chat. So if they called it clay,
yep,
what are the repercussions of that? Is that okay? And if we look at the soil loading rates in 383, sandy clay, clay, and silty clay all receive the same loading rate dependent upon the structure. So while
right.
it's absolutely best that you're fully calibrated to the conditions of your area, it's not that it doesn't make a hill of beans, but it's not gonna, in the end, the product is not gonna be different if
Yep.
you're not hitting the silt content of this. So
Well, and that's the important part is that, the idea is to get the right, you know, texture structure for our loading rates. But as Katie pointed out, when we go into our loading rate tables, we're going to have some things that are going to be very similar. And you'll notice that if you're spending all your time trying to decide, you know, oh geez, I can't tell if this is fine sandy loam or very fine sandy loam, they're on the same group, same chart. So it's not going to matter. The same thing as if you get into like down here. Um, sandy clay loam, silty clay loam, they're all in the same loading rate group. Sandy clay, clay, silty clay are all in the same loading rate group. So that's the other thing to be aware of too, is when you start doing this is, d- do I have to make a difference whether it's silty clay or silty clay loam? Possibly. It may make some bit of a difference depending on what the textures or structures are. But for the most part, you're going to have some latitude in this trying to get the correct loading rate. And you may have some of these that are a little tricky that sort of fall on the border. And you're sort of like, well, which way do I go? It's sort of on the border. I don't know what to do. Well, that's where you have to make a call and say, yeah, this stuff I think is pretty pliable, pretty good. I'm gonna, give it the benefit of the doubt and put it this direction. Or, hey, I'm gonna play it safe. I think it's pretty sticky, pretty tough. I'm gonna call it, the silty clay, and that it's gonna have a less of a loading rate instead of silty clay loam or something like that. So anyway, I hope we had fun with that. A little bit something different and gets us some hands-on experience remotely kind of thing. Okay, we're going to get going in soil physics here, so hopefully we can get through everything. Um, this one bogs down with a few presentations that we do or demonstrations. So
Yeah, before we get started, Matt, there were a few
yeah,
comments in the chat. So there was
yep,
one in the chat about the United Classification System, and that
yep.
they would call it something else. And
We don't
I'm
use it at sacrilege.
yeah, I am
So
blissfully
no,
unaware
so
of the.
just so people understand is that we use the USDA soil classification system, and the reason we use that is because water movement for us is most akin to the growing patterns or growing classifications that we'd have for plant health and things like that. Where the engineering classifications are a little bit different, and that's has to deal with a lot more with clay content and either making a stable foundation or hydraulic conductivity, just getting straight water to move. But because our water has waste in it, we're looking for biological action too. And so that's the reason why we use the USDA classification as opposed to like the engineering classifications. So I haven't remembered my engineering classifications for 30 years, so I'll take your word on it on what you would call that because I haven't kept up on those because I just don't use them. But it looks like everybody I sort of scanned through that everybody was pretty close on them. But then again, it's a little bit of touch and feel. You'll know what's in your area, and again, if you got really well trained here in Wisconsin soils and you move to Georgia, you'd have to learn all over because their clays are different. They're going to feel different, things are going to be different. So you sort of get used to your area. And even here in Wisconsin, I know like Monroe County, when I worked there, we had people that tested in the sand flats, and then we had people that tested up on the hills. And the two never mixed because the sand people got so focused in on telling apart sand, loamy sand, sandy loam. Anything that got a little bit of clay content to it, it was all clay. And even though it wasn't, it was silt loam, silty clay loam. They just called it all clay. And the same thing with the people on the hill. They got really good at differentiating between silt loam, loam, silty clay, loam, clay. And they got any kind of sand, and it was all sand to them. They couldn't. They weren't focused in on those differences. But anyway, we're going to go through the soil physics here so we can get out hopefully close to on time. So soil physics, it's all the fun of physics, but with soil. I know you guys are all so excited to hear about this. Well, the one of the concepts to understand is that soil is made up what they call a three-phase system. So it's solids, liquids, and gases. Three phases of matter. And we say I have the solid components, which are mostly the mineral matter, the rocks that are broke down, but we also do have some organic matter. We talked about that, or even the biologics that are out there, but it's mostly mineral matter. And then we have the other part, which is liquid and gas components. So those are what we think of as the pore space. You're about 50% solid, about 50% pore space in most soils. And that pore space, though, it can vary. That's why I have that big arrow there. It can vary between gas, which is the soil air, and the liquid content. So it can vary back and forth between if it's a wetter soil, maybe it's 35% liquid and 15%. If it's totally saturated, it would be 100%, well, not 100, but 50% liquid, 50% solid. If it's really dry, that liquid content's going to go down. So the pore space goes up and down with gas liquid content depending on how wet the soil is, but the solids aren't going to change. So looking at the solids, one of the concepts I want to identify or talk about is a thing called bulk density. So bulk density is basically how dense soil particles are packed together towards one another. So if you look at this, you don't have to worry about what this all means, but grams per cubic centimeter is a measurement. So the higher it is, the higher the bulk density, the tighter, the more stuff weighs per unit of volume. So if you look at the textural classes, you'll see sand is 1.65, loamy sand 1.6, and these are averages. And then the middle ones are 1.5s, and then clay on the bottom is 1.35. Well, you might be thinking to yourself, well, gee, if I have a bucket of clay and a bucket of sand, to me, it always seems like if I had a 5 gallon pail full of clay, that stuff is really, really heavy. Where if I have a bucket of sand, it's heavy, but in comparison to clay, I think, here you're whatever 3/10 of difference. It's sand is another what 20%, 25% heavier than clay. That doesn't seem to make sense because just me digging in the yard, clay always seems to be so much heavier than sand. So why do we think that that is? And the reason for that is because the clay, the particles themselves are the solids. But why does clay feel heavier? Because it also has water content with it. The clay holds on to the water more, where the sand can dry out easier. So you're actually lifting clay, the void, the pore spaces with water in them. That's why a bucket of clay seems heavier because you're lifting clay and water, where the sand, you're probably just lifting the sand. So, way to think of bulk density here would just be like this: you got a brick, high bulk density, low pore space. Where a sponge has low bulk density, a lot of pores in it. Even where you think the areas are solid, you look at it closely, it's a lot of little holes. It's a lot of pore space. So here's another Slido, different one to join here. I'll blow a poll here. Compaction reduces what component of soil? I'll give you a minute to log in and vote on this. And so we're going to have a couple more questions on this presentation here for this Slido. So compaction reduces what component of soil? Minerals, organic matter, pore space, water, or all the above? Ooh, oh, we got somebody vacillating between pore space. Oh, going with the crowd. Oh, you guys, don't stick up for your own thoughts. You just got to go with the crowd and go with pore space. I see how you are. So what's the correct Oh, see, more. We're convincing more people. Yeah, come on over to pore space. That's what all the cool kids do. So the correct answer is pore space. We can't reduce the solids. I mean, maybe bulk density, but we can't really we can maybe yeah, so you keep going to pore space there. There you go. We can't reduce the solids. I can't compress a piece of granite or a piece of quartz. I can't compress it any. I can't really compress the organic matter, the minerals. I can't compress water. Anybody ever get water in their gas tank on their boat? And how well's your motor run? Does it? You can't really compress. There's no compression on water. It doesn't work very well. So yeah, what's going on is that we're reducing the pore space. So in compaction, solids and liquids don't compress. Water acts as a lubricant and we lose pore space. So in all reality, if we're here and we compact it, we just put the particles closer together, we increase the bulk density, but we don't compact the particles themselves. We just reduced our pore space. That's the bulk density. The water stays the same, solid stays the same. We have less air, less pore space. That's what compaction does. So compaction bulk density can be modified by natural unnatural forces. So years ago, person was looking, I think he had a holding tank, was looking to get a mound. We looked in the side yard area, little fenced in pasture, and I went to stick the shovel in the ground and it went in about an inch and fell over. I could not get the sharpshooter into the soil. And then I look over at the edge of the fence. The field that he's farming is literally a foot higher than the pasture we're in. And I'm like, so that side of the fence, the soil is a foot higher. You come onto this side of the fence, it's a foot lower, and it wasn't erosion. It's like, what is going? Well, it's a little bit erosion, a little bit of a slope, but it's like, why the big difference? And then come to find out, the guy raises draft horses. He has Percheron draft horses. So you get these, big hooves that are pounding the soil constantly. That's what he did. Is he some erosion, but mostly compaction. He made that soil hard as like concrete, and we could not get a shovel into it. So, you can have animals that could do compaction also. So why do we worry about bulk density, compaction, dense soils horizons? We can't get wastewater. Remember, we got to get treatment, but we also have to get dispersal. So we're not worried about maybe treatment because yeah, it's going to take time to go through there and have a lot of retention time along those soil particles that we talked about before for cation exchange capacity or predation with the bugs. But if I can't get water to go through it, what's going to happen? Now I'm going to pond it. And now if I'm ponded and go anaerobic because I'm underwater, now I'm not getting my treatment either. And it's going to go sideways and we're going to have problems. So the issue is once the soil's compacted, it's real difficult to rehabilitate. You're you're out here and you're running around. What happens if your tractor gets stuck on a field in the springtime? What does a farmer do? Does he wait till it dries out? No, what you do is you buy a bigger tractor so you can get out there and go through wetter soil and plant earlier. So you see a lot of agricultural fields do get beat up just because of agricultural things. And also, what do you note here? Around the edges of the fields, this is where the headlands are, where they're turning around. And not only are they compacting, but they're spinning the turn around to go back and do another pass across the field. They get beat up. This is a logging operation, so a lot of times I try to log in the winter to minimize compaction, or especially on wet sites so they can get access. Well, this started to thaw out, and you can see here the big ruts from them trying to log in here. Or you got people doing stuff like this. They're out there bulldozing and packing the soil down and causing compaction problems. And so just the graph on the right there is just to give you an idea that the same tires with the same psi pressure, the same load on a hard, dry soil with a moist soil and a wet soil, that compaction is going to go farther down when it's wet. That's why it's so critical that if they're driving on a field when it's dry is one thing, but if you drive on a field when it's wet, you're going to drive that compaction in. Also, why we have the issues with plowing when it's wet, it's too wet. Because if it's dry and we plow, we're not driving compaction down, we're not smearing. If it's wet and we're trying to plow, we're driving compaction down, we're going to be smearing things. So if you do have a compacted soil, the only way to get around that, add organic matter, go through freeze thaw cycles, get some roots in there to break up that structure, and then lots of time. The guy at the horses, we went back like 3 years in a row, and then he just stopped calling us. I haven't been back there well, I don't know, 15, maybe 20 years. I haven't heard from him. I think he gave up finally. Also, compaction and related to that, filled sites. We talked before, how do you know if a site's filled? I can see it. So this is a filled site. If I can't tell, well, then I guess it don't matter. But I can see you got a buried A horizon in here. They filled the site, put different material on top, and have a new A horizon on top here. So the problem that we have with this is a lot of time when they're filling this site, maybe it's an old lake lot up north or something, and they filled it. What were they doing? They weren't saying, okay, I got to carefully place a nice soil out here that's lighter, that's not heavy clay. I don't want to pack it down. I want to take my time. What are they doing when they're filling a site? They're out there like this. They're out there with a bulldozer pushing at level. They're not worried about, what am I doing? Am I wrecking the structure? So a lot of times this stuff up here might be okay-ish to fill, but this old topsoil usually is what gets beat up. Them driving on it, this will sometimes be platy or massive and have problems. So, compaction filled sites, the key is uniformity, not have different layers in here like this. If it was a sandy site near a lake and it was more sand on top of sand, probably better. Fine texture fill causes us problems because it's easy to wreck the structure and it's easier to compact. Then maybe, we talked about maybe we should only be getting 12 inches of credit because usually the deeper you go, one, we get compaction issues, and two, roots and freeze thaw cycles don't go down in here to break this up. We're only really breaking up probably the top foot or so of poor structure from the compaction and fill. We're really not getting down lower to break any of that stuff up. Okay, so we talked about solids. Let's talk about some air. So, soil aeration. The biggest concept here is to understand that in those pore spaces, we do have soil air moving. And above ground, it's about 21% oxygen, a little bit of carbon dioxide in here. Below ground, a lot less than 21% oxygen, and depending on what's exactly going on, and a lot more carbon dioxide. So, just like water, air will move along different gradients, pressure gradients, and concentration gradients. Air will move back and forth. So we have less oxygen here, more oxygen here. Oxygen will naturally want to diffuse in, more CO2 here, less there. It'll naturally want to diffuse, the other way. And the same thing with nitrogen and hydrogen and all the rest of them. They will naturally want to do that. The problem is that oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse 10,000 times slower through water than through air. So if you have water or solids here and with water filling in the pores, to get from here to here or here down, it's going to go a lot slower through soil pores, soil water than it is through, the atmosphere. So just be aware that's why we want to keep stuff shallow. We want to let stuff breathe. We want to keep stuff narrow. We don't want big, wide beds. We don't want 8 foot deep cells because now we have to go through 8 feet of soil to get that diffusion instead of 1 foot of soil. So, anyway, something to keep in mind. With the systems, again, drain field aeration, same thing. We keep them narrow like this. Not only we get oxygen from the top down, we're getting it in from the side. Oxygen helps break down everything, keep that biomat down, lets the CO2 and other components back out of it. So now the water component. This is probably the bigger one of the well, it is the bigger one of the group. So soil water is where a lot of the physics here comes in. Is soil water can move a couple different ways. It moves across what they call a potential. And so that's a force that causes water to move. So potential energy for your physics class, if you remember it or didn't take it, is sort of an opportunity. That's like potential. If somebody says, "Hey, that draftee's got potential," that means you got an opportunity or something might happen. So a gradient would be a pressure gradient. So if I have high pressure on one side, low pressure on the other, it's going to move from that gradient from the high pressure to the low. Have gravitational gradient. That's going to move along gravity. Matrix gradient, osmotic thermal. So, hot to cold. That's how we get the winds blow. Things like that. Os- Osmosis, that's again concentration gradients. Those osmotic and thermal gradients aren't really, they happen in soil, but they're not something that's really essential to us in designing septic systems or pouts. Ours are going to be pressure, gravitational, and matrix. And not even so much pressure gradient unless you're doing dosing or pressure distribution, but it's mostly gravitational and matrix are what we're going to focus on. So everybody's going to get out a piece of paper. We're going to do some calculations here with Darcy's law. No, I'm just kidding you. We're not gonna, I make that joke, but no, we're not gonna make you do these. I mean, if you're an engineer and you really want to figure out how water's going to move, well, this is how you do it. Math with a lot of letters, not many numbers in it. So the basic thing that you have to understand is that the velocity or volume of water that's actually the volume of water that's moved is based on the biggest thing here that you have to know is this letter K, and that's the hydraulic conductivity. So that's just a measurement of how much water can be transmitted, and other things here like H1, H2 over L. This is like height. This would be like a gradient from like water flows downhill. Easiest way to put it. A hydraulic head and the distance of the flow. But the biggest thing here is that we have this hydraulic conductivity, and that's going to be based on the soil texture and structure in the soil. Obviously, sands are going to move more water than a clay will, those kind of things. So, how does that relate? Well, there's this other one. So, besides a Mr. Darcy, there's also a Mr. Poisson out there, and he came up with this other great equation. And you don't have to worry about all the other letters. The biggest one you have to worry about here is Q, which is the quantity, equals the radius to the fourth power. And so what that means is that if I have a tube, whatever, a pipe or a soil pore, and it doesn't matter whether it's 1 millimeter or 1 meter or 1 mile, whatever it is across, one unit, I can move 1 unit of water through it. If I make it twice the radius, twice as big, it's going to be to the fourth power. So 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 is still 1. If I make that to 2, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16. So even though I went twice as wide, twice the radius, not the diameter, but the radius from the middle to the edge, twice the radius, I'm going to move 16 times as much water. Now, if I go to 4, so I made it 4 times the distance. So from the center to the edge is 4 times this one. It's now 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. I can move 256 times as much water as a 1. And if I go to 8, so you think, hey, I only went 8 times bigger. Now it's actually 8 times 8 times 8 times 8. So you can see by making it just a few little increments here, I'm really increasing the amount of water that I can run. So that's why does sand move water so much faster than clay? Sand has bigger pores than clay. It can move a lot more. Obviously, you can see that a lot more water, even though clay may have a lot more pores. They're all small. If I have 100 pores at one, I can move 100, as opposed to if I have one pore at 8, I'm moving 4,000. So 100 small pores, I'd have to have 4,000 pores the size of one to equal one pore the size of 8. So that's just the thing to realize is that big pores move a lot more water than small pores ever do. Saturation, concept is all pore space is filled with water. That's totally saturated. There's no air anymore. Everything is underwater. All the pores are saturated. So these are my soil particles. I've got, sands and my clay, layered clays and airs, things like that. And then a concept we're going to talk about field moisture capacity is water left after gravitational drainage. So I take my sample, I let the water drip out of it, and there's no more free water dripping out, so gravity is pulling the water down. That's what they call field moisture capacity. So the amount of water held there, but not freely dripping out. And I know you're saying, well, where's this in the code? It's not, but it's a concept we're going to try to understand. And then we have another one called permanent wilt point. So this again relates more to like plants, is that even though there's still some water in these soil particles that are being held here, they are held so tightly by these clay particles or other soil particles that the plants themselves cannot pull that water away from the soil particle. So remember me telling you about that bucket of clay and why clay always feels heavier? Because that clay holds on to water and don't want to let it go. What texture holds more water? So I got a question here for you. So let's answer this one and see if you can come up with this. We got clay. Oh, we got a fight going on now. Oh, we had a strong contender out in the front and he's being overtaken now. People are jumping on the clay bandwagon. That's all right. I know some of you are sharing a computer screen, and I know you may fight over, which camp you're in, if you're in clay or silty. You guys can work that out on your own, but you just get one vote, I guess. Or at least you have your own phone, you could vote. But oh, somebody says Sandy. Hey, there we go. So which one holds more water? Well, it's sort of a loaded question. So which one transmits more water? Sand does. It's got bigger pores. Which texture holds more water? Well, depending on where you're measuring. Are you measuring at field moisture capacity? Are you measuring at permanent wilt point? That's sort of a trick question here. So, where we're going with this is that um, clay generally holds more moisture to it. Sand generally holds less. But at 100% saturation, if all the pores are filled, they're probably pretty close to each other. They probably hold about the same. But what happens is as the soil dries out, look how fast sand sheds its water. So gravitation will empty the large pores really fast. And so at field moisture capacity, sand still can't, after gravitational, sand doesn't hold much because all its large pores drained out. Loam or silty will hold more, clay will hold the most. But then look what happens. The difference between clay here and clay here is it has some water, but it holds on to its water too. Even though it can hold a greater percentage, it doesn't ever want to give it up. So sand will hold less, but it gives it up pretty easily. Loam sort of in the middle. Clay holds the most, and it gives quite a bit up, but it still holds on to a lot. It will not give it up because clay, those small pores, it will hold on to. So, what does all this mean here? Well, for you, when we look at the hydraulic conductivity and where we're looking at, our design loading rates are in this ballpark of between hydraulic conductivity of how fast sand can move and how fast clay can move, and also the field moisture content or the permanent wilting point. We're trying to stay between field moisture capacity, permanent wilt point, and so all of our things, the design loading rates fall into a zone in here. That's why we have the loading rates the way we do. Because if we really wanted a loading rate for clear water, sand would probably be at like 3, 4, 5, 10 gallons per square foot per day if all we were doing is just moving clear water through it. But we're not moving clear water. So again, water flow in a Pounce system or underneath it, what we're looking at is hydraulic conductivity, or that K number or K at SAT. That's basically hydraulic conductivity at saturated content, which we don't want, but how fast water can move down into it, but also how fast water. We can also have hydraulic gradient sideways, how fast water moves sideways off site, important for us in mounds. And that's why we talked about, remember, we talked about linear loading rate a little bit, is that if we can't get the water into the ground fast enough, it's going to move sideways, and we don't want to have it leak out the toe. We may have to do a mound toe slope extension. And that's why we have like our base areas we calculate on soils that we have very low loading rates. We may have to make the toe longer to keep that thing in the ground so it's not leaking out. But again, we can have same size systems, 100-foot long, 1 foot wide, or 10-foot long, 10-foot wide. They're both 100 square feet, but this one only has 1 gallon per each lineal foot, 100-foot long. This one has 10 gallons for each lineal foot. We're having a lot higher loading rate, run the risk of leaking out with the high loading rates, linear loading rates. So water movement in soil, that's to do with soil porosity and permeability. It's primary influenced by texture. Structure also influences it. So clay, even though it moves a little, if you have a well-structured clay, it can actually move a lot of water. Be surprised. Because why? What's between the structures between the beds and clay? A very large pore, and then we can move water through that. So our water movement forces, again, are gravitational, gravity pulling it down. And then we have these other ones called capillary or matrix forces. And there's two of them. There's adhesion, cohesion. So the way to think of that is adhesion or adhesive or adhering. So that's water adhering to something else. Like if this is a glass tube, it's adhering to the side of the tube. And cohesion is, you can think of like cooperative. So it's all the little water particles, they're hands across America kind of thing. They're holding hands and they're cooperatively holding on to each other. So what does that mean for us? Layer soils, fine texture over coarse textured, coarse over fine textured can cause us some issues when we're moving through things like that. So we talked about capillary action, larger pores move faster. And the reason for that is capillary action or adhesion to those small pores is that we get to a point where these are small tubes getting bigger and bigger on this die. So you can see a big tube here, very small tube. It will wick its way up in here. And why is that? The water actually adheres to the sides. It actually sort of climbs the wall a bit because it's such a narrow gap. The adhesion and the cohesive forces of the water bridging that gap, it can bridge the small gap. It can't bridge a large gap. But even if you looked at something like this, you notice that around the edges, you see that water will curve up along the edge. Or if you're in class, measuring like a graduated cylinder or something like in chemistry, they call it the meniscus. It's like this little curvature at the edge because that's the adhesive action of the water on the edge of that glass. So it's also the secret behind like stuff like this, Bounty, Wicker Picker Upper. Why is that? The towels have small pores in it because of the fibers of the paper towel, and that wicks up moisture. It pulls in the moisture because in those small pores, the adhesive property of the liquid to those small pores is what brings the liquid into the paper towel. So the other capillary action we mentioned is cohesion. That's the attractive force between water molecules. So that's surface tension. So you've probably done this trick where you fill a glass over full and you can see how it's sort of bulge here and it's actually above the top of the glass. Well, that's the surface tension or the cohesion of the water hanging onto itself that actually is able to bridge that and make it actually above the glass until it gets to the point we add enough where what force takes over? Gravitational force is stronger than the cohesion. It breaks the cohesive force, and then gravity flows over the edge of the glass. So now we learned about some different forces, matrix forces, cohesion, adhesion, different size pore spaces, gravitational force. So here is a question. We have these are pieces of plexiglass here, and we have these grid lines painted. And so this is sand. The tan stuff here is sand. And this bar in here, this diagonal horizontal bar, dipping bar, is a coarser material, coarser sand. And we have purple dye that's going to be added to the top. So this is going to inject purple dye into here. And what's going to happen, is as we add more and more liquid here, gravitational forces are going to start pulling that liquid down. So the question is, where's the purple dye going to go? As we load more and more, it's going to be going down. And then what path is it going to take when it encounters this diagonal bar of a coarser material? Let's have a vote. What do you guys think? What path will the purple dye take? So is it going to go straight down and keep on going through the coarse material? Straight down, then to the right in the coarse material? Straight down, and then to the right above the textural change? Or I haven't a clue. Well, everybody's got an opinion. That's good. So let's see. So, oh, see, there's somebody honest. I don't have a clue. So the four runners are straight down and then to the right in the course material. So everybody that's got their answer locked in, well, let's see what the answer is. Oh, see, everybody's bowing to peer pressure again. Everybody's going with straight down, then to the right in the course material. Got a few holdouts, but oh, see, there you're going. You're going for it. Well, let's see what happens. Well, the finer textured layers will restrict water movement, but so will the coarser layers. And so gravitational force, once it's saturated here, water's going to start moving down. So capillary is holding it right where it is now, but as we put more and more and the soil can't hang on to it, it's going to start moving its way down. But look what happens when it encounters that coarse material. Is it in the coarse material? It's not. It's right above the coarse material and it starts moving. And it moving. You can see the gray here. It's still gray. Is there any liquid in there? Any purple in there? No, it's staying along the top. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, gee, Matt, why doesn't it enter the coarse material? You think that, well, those big pores are going to transmit a lot of liquid and it's going to go. Well, for those of you that jumped on the bandwagon and all said, hey, it's going to go straight down to the right in the coarse material, you 61 percenters, that's incorrect because until we have a barrier here or something that's going to oversaturate this to the point where we oversaturate capillary action, the matrix and the cohesive and adhesive properties here. Once we totally saturate all the pores, and you can see there's gaps in between here, if we would saturate all these pores, then it would finally push into the coarse material and then it would go shooting sideways. But until then, it's not going to enter a larger pore if it's in a small pore. That small pore is holding on to that water through the adhesive property, that matrix potential. It's not going to let it go until you'd have so much that the gravitation would overcome it. Basically, we'd have to be so saturated it would overcome. But for right now, as long as you're adding a little bit in here, it's going to stay above that. It's never going to enter into the coarse material. So that's what we call tension saturation. So it's the tension, surface tension, the adhesive property in here between the particles here. It's holding on to it, but what was happening is one would pop in here, it pop out here, and then keep moving to the right. It wasn't enough that it saturated everything that would finally push its way through by gravitation. So water movement in layered soil, move from layer to layer. Basically, you have to pond. The dipping ones were sort of where they tricked us. But if we're horizontal like this, it would basically pond on top of that layer until it saturated it totally, and then it would push through into the next layer, and then push through to the next layer. So we'd have to have totally saturated, then pop through, totally saturate, pop through. So it's going to cause areas where we're going to be saturated, and if we're saturated, remember a term that we talked about earlier today? Either saturated or near saturated. What happens? We can have redox features form. So even though there's maybe not free water here, saturated, if it's near saturation and just doesn't have enough to punch through to the next horizon, we could have some redox that have formed there. So again, unsaturated, saturated zones, we want to make sure we have unsaturated soil. Saturated, even intention saturation can cause us some issues possibly. We don't want to have, again, saturated, we don't want. Near saturation isn't great either. But again, matrix forces don't allow downward gravitation. You can see it's wet down here, and that's possibly attention saturation. We could have redox. So I got a couple demonstrations here. We're sort of running short on time, but I want to show you a couple. Tension saturation, I'm going to skip. Bulk density. That's just squeezing a sponge. I think you got the concept there. But I want to show you the good one is some capillary action, and what happens with that. So we are going to flip to the camera, and we're going to show a few things on here. So the first one that I have is, well, I could show you the paper towel, but just like anything, if we do have something like that, and well, it's sort of hard to see, but there we've got our water drop there, and then if I just like anything, we put it in there, where does the water go? It's gone. Capillary action sucked it right into the paper towel. So the next one I'm going to try to show you is again another capillary action. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. It could have something to do with I bought my toothpicks off of Timu, which isn't the greatest site. So what I have is I have some little toothpicks, the thinnest bamboo toothpicks known to man. And so I fold them over and try to keep them tight as I can here. And if this works, sort of neat, but so even in these little toothpicks, we do have some capillary in the wood of the toothpicks themselves. I think it works better with full size normal toothpicks. But so we have them sort of bunched together like this, and what happens is capillary action. If we add a little bit of water, let me zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier for you to see. So we have these toothpicks here, and hopefully, if I add a little drop of water here, you see them moving. Oh, they're doing pretty good. Don't want to add a whole lot, but you see how the toothpicks are now moving. They change shape. Instead of being stuck together, they're spreading themselves out. This one I probably cracked too much. That's why he's not moving very well. Um, but the one on the other side, that one's really trucking right along there. Um, yeah, these over here moved really well, but you change the shape. Oh, this one up here is starting to move. You can see he's pushing up here. This one is moving. Yeah, that dark one there, I think I broke. He ain't doing so well. But you can see how they changed their pattern. They were stuck together, and now they spread themselves out, um, make a different pattern here. We'll help this one along. He should have went like this, and this one should have went like that. But there, that's what it's supposed to look like, something along those lines. But anyway, yeah, so that was the capillary action. You can see how it moved in there. Anyway, the little drop of water went through the capillary action through the fibers in the toothpicks, and it made a move. And what was going on there? It was basically the capillary action wicked into those toothpicks. It swelled back up the dried toothpicks, made them move, and that movement was basically due to capillary action. We got a physical movement because of capillary action wicking up into those um, wicking up into those toothpicks. So anyway, just a little side one here, but we're running a little short on time, so want to get everybody out of here relatively close. So anyway, that's what that one looked like. So there are a couple rules in the code, 1 foot, 2 foot rule that says in 385, a sole profile where redox features are confined within 12 inches of tension saturated silt loam or finer, overlying unsaturated coarse sandy loam or coarser that has a depth and a course material that's adequate to accommodate distribution cell and dispersal zone. And you're like, great, Matt, I didn't understand what you just said. What does that mean? Well, what it says here is that if we have a fine textured soil, we can have near saturation at times, just because it holds the water so tight, is not letting it release. So we might have some redox form, but really we're not having a perched water table. The system will still work fine. We don't want to put the system in where it's redoxed here because we can have some water being held. But what this says though is that if I have silt loam or finer over unsaturated coarse sandy loam or coarser, I can install the system down below here because even though it's holding it here, it's not ponding really, but it's enough that I could get redox to form, but it's not releasing it to flood out my system. And my system I can install here and still have my 3 foot separation down to a limiting factor and get my system to work. The other one is called the 2 foot rule. Looks very similar, but the one change is instead of being unsaturated coarse sandy loam, this one is unsaturated coarse loamy sand. So it's even coarser. So we can have up to 2 feet of redox in this heavier textured silt loam or silty clay loam or clay or whatever. And as long as it's unsaturated coarse loamy sand, a coarser, a bigger textural change, we can have up to 2 feet of redox zone. And then we would install then the system in the system area down below. Still have to meet our separation distance underneath, but we can sort of discount the redox up above as a tension saturation. So where else could we find tension saturation that might occur? Anytime there's an abrupt textural change. I've seen it in the Stevens Point area, fine or actually very fine sand over very fine sand or fine sand over sand. We can get a textural change that would be enough to show possibly some redox. Any abrupt structure changes, massiveness, platiness, sometimes, the plow plane at the bottom of an A horizon where it's platy from, implements going across, the old moldboard plows causing problems. We might see some textural, it's a structural change and see some redox associated with that. So not to say that there's not other areas where tension saturation is found, but there's only two codified exemptions, the 1 foot rule, 2 foot rule. But we may have some issues where we say, hey, there's some redox there, but it's tension saturation, or we've got a little bit of platiness and a little bit of redox associated with that, but it's really not holding water there where it's going to flood out our system. And we've done, some of them have explained it away through an interpretive process, an interpretive determination to say, yeah, there's some redox there, but it's not going to cause us issues with our functioning of our system. It's just because of loss of structure or a very fine sand over a sand, medium sand. It has just got enough of a textural change that it's causing some issues. The trick is making sure is it tension saturation and you have to justify it, not just say, just a little bit, we're going to ignore it. Because if you're in sand, coarse sand, how much iron do you have? Are you going to be able to see redox in coarse sand? Maybe not. I wonder about that sometimes, especially up north and a lot of the, you know, glacial fields left behind that, are we really seeing redox? Because if there's nothing there to see, how can I see it? There's no iron there to transform, oxidize, or reduce. How can I see it? I don't know. Not going to be able to find any. So other issues with water, groundwater mounding can be issues, not getting it to move away fast enough, especially on big systems. If we're talking like 20,000, 30,000 gallons a day, groundwater mounding is an issue underneath that because you're artificially increasing the water table. Surface runoff and collection, again, good placement of sites, not only subsurface, but what's going on with surface water. Too permeable, it's not in our code, but I know the DNR worries about that land application of wastewaters and sludges and biosolids about being too fast. It's not staying in contact long enough shooting through. and probably some others that we can think about. But anyway, that is it for today.